the other thing that I want to talk about also in terms of just sort of the physical, I want to mention the psychological or the emotional piece. One of the things that stood out to me as I did my dissertation and interviewed folks was this sort of mental space around who they were, how they functioned, and what was necessary. I talked a little bit about independence and autonomy. Does anybody know what singular event older adults will never forget in terms of giving up a particular freedom? Does anybody have any idea what singular event? No, not an outside event, but in terms of impact of physical disability or lessening skill and ability, what singular kind of thing do they have to give up that has the most impact? Driving. Okay. I mean, and think about the symbolism. What was the thing that you all lived for? Getting your driver's license, right? What did it mean? Independence, autonomy. And so, and again, I'm not saying that people should not give up driving, but again, recognize that for older adults, then those kinds of things are tremendous. Imagine if you couldn't drive yourself, or you were not permitted to drive, or you couldn't get in your car, or if you got in your car, you couldn't get out, et cetera, because of where you went. So those are the kinds of things that older adults remember. And so, so again, like I said, so there's that part about where they have to deal with loss. But for the most part, they stay very, very positive, and they recognize that, well, I'm able to do less, but I can cope and adapt in a variety of kinds of ways. I can do things a little bit differently. I can rearrange the pots and pans that I need to get to on the counter instead of having to reach because I can't reach anymore because my arthritis, or I've got some other aches and pains when I can't do that. They might rearrange other parts of their house to make it handy in some sort of way. So they can function in some manner that continues to sort of maintain their independence and autonomy. The other thing that I found older adults is recognizing there were certain activities, although they didn't want to give them up, they would give them up because it created more time to do what they could do and more importance. How many of you would really, really hate having to give up doing the laundry? Right. But that's something older adults don't want to do. They don't want to go up doing that because it symbolizes not, it isn't a matter of time for them. It's a matter of ability to manage sort of doing those kinds of things. So again, recognize on the other side of what we see as a hassle is for them sort of that sort of gift. But again, they worked through those pieces of recognizing what was important, what they need to do, where they need to put their energy, et cetera. So there's this tremendous resilience in older adults. And I think that despite the challenges, the physical limitations, they do quite well as a population on the whole. And I remember one of my study participants talked about, each day was a challenge, sort of thinking, well, how will I feel today when I get up? What can I do? What will I have trouble doing? And in the course of doing my interviews, I would summarize them and then call them back and talk to them on the phone about that. And I called her and I said, well, how's it going today? And she said, today's a special day. She said, I am so challenged by how I feel and what I'm going to be able to do. She said, this day is different. It's much, much harder. And she said, it's taking everything I can do to stay positive, to stay forward, to move forward and not giving up. So again, recognize that there may be particular parts where the days are tough, but for the most part, they see themselves making it day by day. And they, again, it's not that they're in denial, but it's like every day I live, every day I manage at home is another gift to me, and they look forward to that. This particular woman, and another thing that I found was interesting was a tremendous sense of humor. She told two stories. She was, something had happened, and she wasn't hospitalized, but she became weak, and she had 3 sons, no daughters, and her sons came and stayed with her, alternated, so that she didn't have to go to the hospital and she didn't end up in a nursing home. And one son was retired. I can't remember if another son was retired or not, but they were able to come. But the one son who lived locally still worked and he had a family, but he stayed there with her. And she said, she was glad she had them there. She felt bad about imposing on them, but it was that sort of balance of, well, I get to stay independent. But so her son was there. And this woman was overweight. And she said, my son and I were in the bathroom. He was trying to help me get in and out of the tub. And she said, it was such a struggle. And she said, I just want to die. And he said, you're going to have to dig your own grave. So she said those are the kinds of things she and her family just have this banter about humor. And she said, so what it allowed her to do was recognize it could be worse. and help her recognize that, yes, it's tough, it's difficult. And that's a particular piece I think that we need to remember sometimes for older adults is they face that every day. And they do quite well. There may be a day when they're discouraged, super discouraged, and some support and encouragement is really important. Her other story was that she said she liked Dennis the Menace, and she had a couple of videos of the Dennis the Menace, and she said every once in a while she just was in one of those really down days, and she'd call her son up, and she said, I'm going to put the Dennis the Menace video in. She said, bring me some snacks, I'm going to have a pity party. And she used, again, humor to get her through those tough times. So recognize that sometimes when we engage with people, that sometimes using some humor can be really, really valuable. I mean, again, think about how that may play an important part in your own life as well. And again, these are human beings. They may be older, they may have less or more hair or whatever, but they're really, really human beings, and they have a lot of experience and things to give in terms of socialization and those things. And part of another study I did when I was in my graduate program, we also interviewed older adults and caregivers about those issues around caregiving. And I think that's the other piece we have to pay attention to in terms of the generation of older adults. There's some demographic factors that make a big difference. We live in a time when more and more people are divorced, families are smaller, and in some situations, couples may not have had children or may not have married. And so that isn't, so there's that demographic we have to pay attention to. So for a couple that's divorced, where naturally the husband and wife might care for each other, which is, still occurs for married couples, it becomes a different kind of situation. And so the adult offspring may have to balance that. And sometimes they may be balancing that against their own work. We hear about the sandwich generation. They may have their own families, and then they may have one or two parents to care for. And so it becomes really important to provide support and recognition for the role of family members in that task. It's considered a career, caregiving as a career. How long do you think, on average, that career lasts? Anybody have an idea? As a kid, 12's high. It's 4.9.
Really?
Yeah.
We're talking about in-home kind of.
Well, and again, recognize that caregiving can be any multiple number of things. We would, in our studies, we would have older adults who went into nursing homes. The family still participated in their care. They're still caregivers. And the other thing is to keep in mind is if you work with older adults and or their families, and you say to the older adult or to the family member, call them a caregiver, they're going to say, what are you talking about? I'm not a caregiver. That's my mother. That's my father. That's my son. That's my daughter. So be aware of the fact that professionally we refer to them as caregivers, but they may not see that themselves. And the other side to keep in mind is that for these people who provide care to family members, sometimes it's not this incredibly overt sort of decision. There may be a situation where they say, well, let me help you run some errands. And then before long, it's like, well, I'll help you with the laundry, or I'll take it home and do it. And more tasks get added on. And so over time, then there may be additional kind of work. And family members are very willing to do that many times. Again, as we did interviews in one of our studies, we found some family members saying, my dad took care of me when I grew up. It's my turn, and I'm glad to be able to do it. And so then for us, as professionals and policy, as we look at those kinds of things, we need to think about what can we do to support those caregivers. There are some services in terms of respite care. It isn't a lot. It may spell them a bit in terms of the caregiving so they can do some things, but typically we don't have a lot in the way of services that provide great long breaks for family members, but some does exist. If we were to pay these people to do the care they provided, it would be several $100 billion per year. it's basically, it's hard to quantify. And part of that cost is we know that sort of substituting, so if we paid somebody to do it in lieu of the family, there's a cost. There are people who quit their jobs, cut their hours back to do it. There may be other expenses that the family picks up, maybe paying for some additional care, paying for medications, et cetera. So I think one of the big challenges, and the Administration on Aging recognized this in the early 2000s, that we need to do more things around supporting those people who are caregivers. And recognize also that there's some stresses and strains in that. One of a study participant we had who, we met with her daughter and talked with her, and we talked to the older adult about the caregiving piece. And the daughter was very comfortable doing it. She was glad because she knew she was keeping her mom out of a nursing home. But for the older adult, it was really difficult. And one of the things that to me just was really, really significant was, she said, I love my daughter. She said, but she's so busy doing the things I need done, I don't get to see my daughter anymore. She said, that's all I want. I want that time. So again, recognize that people are making tremendous sacrifices. They're making it work. And again, like I said, neither one was complaining. They were happy about it. But there is a certain amount of social loss. And that social loss is really, really big for those family members who are caregiving. Yes, Clarissa.
Well, the Family Leave Act supports somebody to take care of their parent. I know for pregnancies and things like that.
Some of those particular pieces around family medical leave really relate to is there a benefit? Will they pay the time off or not? They may be able to use the family medical leave to take the time off in an unpaid capacity. Essentially yes, but they may not be able to be paid their salary.
You would lose your job if you were able to.
Yeah, it comes under a family medical leave. Yes.
For the family medical leave, isn't that time limited too?
Correct. Yeah, family medical leave. There's a particular limit, and I'm not sure. Is it 6 weeks? I think. Is it a little bit?
You can do more than 6 weeks, but also it's unpaid. Part of it is unpaid.
Right.
Like if you use up all your vacation and
Right.
things like that, then the rest is unpaid. But I think you're allowed, if I'm not mistaken, up to like a year. If it's a close family report, if you don't have up to like that amount of vacation,
Right.
which normally you would not, then
Right.
the rest goes unpaid. The only thing I think, the federal law guarantees you your job. You can come back to the job, and they cannot fire you or cannot cut your salary, but then you have to take what's available. If they can like change your position and say,
Right.
we're going to let you do A instead of B, but we'll pay you the same amount of money,
Okay.
things like that.
Okay.
But then part of it is unpaid. If you don't have leave to cover it, they don't have to pay you.
Correct. And that's, so in some ways that can be a real benefit. But again, recognize that depending on the particular family situation, there can be a cost factor. So back to my older adult who said that she missed her daughter. And one of the things that becomes really important for the older adult is this notion about reciprocity. I'm taking. So in this particular case where the mother was feeling like she missed her daughter, appreciated everything her daughter wanted, one of the things that she had an agreement with is that her daughter had to call her when she got home. She said, that way I know she's safe. And it was her way as a mother to take care of her daughter in a way. And so again, that's a key piece, is people want to negotiate this level of reciprocity. And that's usually where some of the difficulty is around this notion of caregiving. But I don't have anything to offer you. And again, like I said, in one situation, one daughter said, but my dad took care of me, and so it's an even exchange. I'm paying him back. And so sometimes as you work with people, sometimes it becomes really important to sort of acknowledge those pieces. And again, so like I said, I really was aware of this psychological, emotional sort of resilience and capacity of older adults to really, really deal with day-to-day sort of challenges. And as I said, I didn't think they were in denial or being unrealistic, but there was some measure of not giving up. One of the things that I remember a couple people saying, and I think in the quiz there's a comment about this, but I do remember a couple people saying that they had noticed some people who had retired and given up and didn't live very long. Now, there's no research evidence that indicates that's the particular norm. But the point of these study participants was to say it's important not to give up and to know where to flex, where, what things to give up, but not to give up hope, et cetera. I think, again, the whole notion of chronic disease is really difficult. Now, we know that depression exists in older adults. Not all older adults are depressed. We know that depression occurs in chronic disease, but not all older adults with chronic disease are depressed. So again, recognize that we want to be careful and just not sort of say, well, that's just normal. If somebody is depressed for something, we want to figure out what it is and treat that behaviorally, possibly with medication, et cetera. So one of the risks sometimes with older adults is people say, well, and professionals may just say, well, they're old and this is what we expect. And so part of the quiz is to begin to get you to think about challenging those sort of myths or beliefs about what is. And sometimes folks are just really dealing with a lot of loss, a lot of change, and so they are naturally depressed. It's symptomatic of the change, and we need to address that, providing psychosocial support, sometimes medication to lift the symptoms, et cetera. There are support groups. We don't do a lot of mental health counseling for older adults, but I think those are areas that we need to really develop in terms of how do we provide that. One of the challenges is for that generation that's very old today is that mental health has such a negative connotation. I think as the population ages, it's going to be less so, but what becomes important is that relationship we establish with older adults. Do we see them as able, capable, mentally alert, et cetera, or do we look at them with pity or someone who's just not capable, et cetera? So we want to really be hard about sort of how we interact with them. I think back in my career about some of the many things that older adults have taught me, and it's been delightful. One sort of story I have is that for years, I struggled with the concept of forever. I don't think that's particularly normal, but it just is like, how long is forever? And if I could imagine what forever is, what would that look like? It just was just this vague sort of concept. And I remember actually I was working on a psychiatric unit, and an older adult was brought in because he was considered to be denial, and the family was doing some stuff around competency, and he was committed, et cetera. And but there were some pieces about him that were really sharp, and it just was, so this concept of what is forever was sort of bouncing around in my head. I was in my 20s, so I think I still believed I had forever, but and it was just out of the blue, this man says, do you know what forever is? I said, no, do you? And he said, I do. And it's like, what is it? And he said, imagine an eagle flying over a granite mountain. And every time it flies by, it swipes its beak across the mountain twice. And when it wears it down to the level ground, that's forever. So, and the reason I tell that story is because that was, it reminds me of sort of the richness of what people have in the way of experience, knowledge, and wisdom. And I think that's some of the gift that older adults bring to us. So as you work with older adults, get into that space of who they are, what their stories are, because many times what they're trying to do is say, I am somebody, I have been somebody, I have these things, I am more than what you see here. And sometimes it helps, they need to affirm themselves, and so you can be a good sounding board for them in many ways.